Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today is a lifelong martial artist, natural bodybuilder, actor, screenwriter, and popular YouTuber. He starred in The Last Kumite, Warrior Island, and Bloodstorm, and recently signed with Official Celebrity Boxing and has an upcoming fight with Sugar Shane Mosley. His popular Viking Samurai YouTube channel features interviews with many greats from the action and martial arts world, including ones like Scott Adkins, Sheldon Lettich, Don the Dragon Wilson, and many more. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. David Kurzhal. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Brian.
Hey, I appreciate the time. I know it's a busy weekend. I think you're at Dragon Fest this weekend, aren't you?
Oh, it was a blast. It
Nice.
was yesterday. It was Saturday, August 3rd, and I shared a booth with Don the Dragon Wilson. You know, a lot of people who were there recognized me from the channel. You know, a lot
That's
of people
awesome.
just know me as the Viking Samurai. Some people don't even know my real name, David.
I need to get to that. I interviewed Michael. He was one of my first guests back my first year, and I've always wanted to go out to Dragon Fest and never been out there. And I need to, now that my daughter's going into her senior year of high school and we're going to be empty nesters, I think next summer I need to try to plan to get to Dragon Fest for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely got to go there at least once, man.
Yeah, and I used to live in California. I just, I miss it, and I haven't been out there since, I guess I was there about 4 years ago just for a college visit with my son, but otherwise I haven't been out there for a long time, and in 12 years. So I just need to get back out and visit friends and visit some guests that I've had on the show since then. It would be fun too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm sure you know a lot more people now that you left since you've been doing this show.
That is definitely true. So, well, what we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I want to know where that first interest came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
You know, I got my first taste of martial arts, I think when I was around 6 years old in judo, but I wasn't really that interested in it. It was something that my parents got me and my brother into.
Okay.
Did it for about a year. Was nothing that I ever wanted to do, you know. It wasn't until I was 13 where I decided, okay, I want to do this and I need to do this because I was getting bullied in middle school at the time. So, you know, watching those movies, obviously we've all seen The Karate Kid. We've all seen Bloodsport growing up.
Yep.
You know, those movies are empowering. And watching those characters, I was, you know, I needed to become that basically just to make myself more comfortable in school and to empower myself and build confidence. So I started at 13. The schools in that area, you know, Taekwondo was very popular where I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Taekwondo schools are just popular in general. You know, if you look for a martial arts school, you're probably going to find Taekwondo. You might find a couple karate schools. I mean, these days you'll just find a lot of the MMA gyms. Back in the day, it wasn't that easy to find like an Aikido school, even though Steven Seagal was really popular at the time. And,
Right.
you know, a movie like Only the Strong came out, but you couldn't find any Brazilian capoeira schools.
That is
So I started with Taekwondo, and I was always interested in the kicks anyway, seeing Van Damme and, you know, Philip and Simon Rhee and Best of the Best and all those movies. So, yeah, that's when I started, and kind of why it was a combination of being motivated by the movies, and these characters were, you know, just that's what you wanted to be as a guy. It's like, oh, man, I need to become that. And then also, you know, kind of like that real life Karate Kid narrative of like, it's a common thing, you know, of getting bullied and having to be able to fend for yourself.
Definitely. Yeah. Kind of the same thing with me. It's kind of how I started too. But so that first Taekwondo school you tried, was that more on the sports side or more on the traditional side?
Well, you know, it's funny because I didn't even really know at the time. I didn't even distinguish, or we didn't even really have the internet back in 93. So I didn't even know there was a difference between sport and more of the traditional that has some of the self-defense. They have, you know, knife defenses and all this other stuff, which looking back are not that good. I mean, they're a lot more effective if you take Krav Maga, which I've taken for years. But even then, they're saying if someone pulls a knife on you, leave if at all possible. I don't even try to do any of this stuff, man. Like, that's a last resort. But yeah, it was more traditional and self-defense based. It wasn't the sport Taekwondo that I would find out later because, you know, you have the WTF and the ITF. But for me, back in the day, it was just Taekwondo.
Yeah, the same way. That's been my core system for over 30 years. But the same
Oh,
thing.
nice.
When I joined, I didn't know. Same thing. It was like, oh, Taekwondo, Taekwondo. I didn't know. I mean, my first system was Tong Soo-do. My second system was Shotokan, and then I got into Aikido and Taekwondo at the same time. But yeah, even at that point, I was 18, and I didn't know there was a difference. So kind of the same boat as you.
Yeah.
Now, did you get involved in the competition side at all? Did they do tournaments, or was it more strictly traditional?
Oh, they did do tournaments, you know. Actually, I remember one of the early tournaments, my brother actually knocked somebody out, and
Nice.
this was all pre-black belts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the guy charged at him. He did like a spinning heel kick and literally knocked that guy out. And this was a point tournament, you know, but nobody really cared that the guy got knocked out, though. I don't think that was supposed to happen, but you know, anything can happen. But, you know, local competitions, I was like in Washington State, you know, most of the schools would compete against each other here and there.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your very first tournament you ever competed in?
Yeah, but it wasn't anything as spectacular as like knocking someone out like my brother. That's the one that I remember, you know, and that was like 30 years ago.
So did you do quite a bit of competition, or just something you tried and that was enough?
We did it for a little bit, you know. We both moved around quite a bit being Army brats.
Okay.
But yeah, when the instructor, you know, would ask us, we would definitely go. It wasn't a ton, but it was a handful of them.
Okay. And now you said that first school Taekwondo. Now, how long did you stay at that first school, and what was the next school or system you got into?
Oh, several years, you know, because I was 13 till about 16.
Okay.
And then, you know, during that time, like I really got into bodybuilding. Like I actually wanted to be a professional bodybuilder, funny enough. And, you know, I was putting a lot of emphasis on that. But then I kind of found out later, you know, I was a naive at the time thinking all these dudes who were like Mr. Olympia were natural.
Mm-hmm.
But then and I was working out at the Army gyms and the guys were telling me, no, those guys are on all this stuff and all this stuff. But I was just naive, not believing that. And it wasn't until like Bill Phillips and Muscle Media 2000 came out and they kind of pulled the curtain back and it was like, oh, these guys are taking all this stuff. So like my dreams of bodybuilding kind of died there as far as me not wanting to go that route and take all those, you know, drugs and everything else.
Okay.
But basically, I kept doing my Taekwondo training and then I got heavily into bodybuilding. Then I would say about 19 or 20, so I was just out of high school and I was working on 24-hour fitness. And one of the instructors was seeing me doing the splits and he's like, hey, are you like a martial artist or something? And I was like, yeah. Anyway, I found out that personal trainer actually had a Kempo school down the street from that gym.
Nice.
And I started training with him for a while. So
Okay.
Kempo was like the next thing, Kempo karate.
Was that American Kempo, Chinese Kempo, Shaolin Kempo? Which?
See, that's another thing. At that time, it didn't even distinguish.
Right.
His school literally just had a sign that said Kempo, and I know he was mixing in a bunch of other stuff, and he was like a big Steven Seagal fan. You know, up until the time, funny enough, I was watching Steven Seagal movies, but I was a bigger fan of Van Damme, and then training with him, you know, kind of turned me a lot more onto Steven Seagal and his techniques.
Nice. Looking back now, do you know like what lineage that Kempo school was, or?
I don't know. I think it was more American Kempo.
Okay.
Because isn't the Chinese spelled with an M?
I've seen it both ways, but traditionally I believe it should be. And of course, then there's, you know, Shaolin Kempo, Ralph Castro's system. That's, you know, even a little bit. I mean, they're all kind of connected. You know, a lot of them go back to, you know, William K.S. Chow and, you know, depending which versions of history you want to believe and who you talk to. But I mean, they're all kind of similar in ways, and they have their similarities and differences. But yeah, I've seen it with an M and with an A. Like we had a local Kempo school here that was Okinawan Ryuku Kempo. So it's, you know, another one even very more different with that. It was, you know, a lot more, you know, and I look at it a lot more joint manipulations and pressure points and stuff. I think it's almost like karate where the name just gets maybe tossed around a lot with a lot of systems.
A lot of it becomes, I don't want to just say generic, but almost hybridized. And I don't know like how, you know, because there's some people, this goes with any art, not just martial arts, that they like to just keep it completely traditional and they're so resistant to change, even if, like, this is the one thing I liked about Krav Maga, like the fluidity of it. For example, I was involved with Krav Maga worldwide, and that was in the Midwest, but the instructors would go back to the main training center in LA with Darren. And basically, if there's a better way to do a technique, they will implement that, and then they'll bring it back to the Midwest and teach that. But depending on the instructor you had, they may still teach the older, less effective way, you know?
Yeah.
But I do like their philosophy on, you know, they're not going to keep a technique just to keep it because this is the way it's always been done and this is the way it always will be done. They're like, no, if there's a better way to do it, we'll do it the better way.
Yeah. And you look at something like a good example of that is American Kempo, where Ed Parker was always changing and adding to the system. And then you have, after he died, a lot of his high black belts, they wanted to just leave it exactly as is and not continue to grow it. And it just kind of leave it with nothing more added to it in 30 years since he passed away, which is, to me, is kind of insane.
That's what I like about Jeff Speakman. He talked about, because he worked directly with Ed Parker, of course, and he talked about, this is where I believe Ed Parker would have probably took it anyway with the Kenpo 5.0 and implementing a lot more ground and jiu-jitsu. And like anything, any art, not even martial art, I think should evolve over time. It would make sense. But, I could see the argument that these traditionalists make. Yeah. I mean, that's, I'm open-minded. Yeah. So I don't really fight for either. I mean, for me, I'm always going to be, I think Bruce Lee had it right back in the day. Mm-hmm. He was always trying to evolve, trying to not limit himself to one system or one style. And just, even his son, the late Brandon Lee, said, my Jeet Kune Do is not my father's Jeet Kune Do, nor should it be.
Right.
And I think that's profound.
And it's different when you're looking at a traditional system like Goju-Ryu or Shotokan. That's based on tradition, where like something like an American Kempo or Jeet Kune Do was created in the last 60, 70 years, and it was meant to be different and meant to keep growing and changing. So I see both sides of it, obviously, but if it's going to be American Kempo and you're saying it was based on Ed Parker's teachings, well, Ed Parker didn't want you to stay in one place. He wanted you to keep moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I know a lot of guys who grew up with the martial arts, they've become friends and training partners with people of different styles. So, you might be a Taekwondo guy and then training with a guy who's more of a Thai base and you kind of share some techniques. But even though you'll never necessarily, if you're that Taekwondo background, become the Thai fighter, you can implement stuff where people, at its surface might be like, maybe this is a Thai guy. It's like, but he's got these Taekwondo kicks,
Yeah, I mean, like my instructor, he teaches traditional Taekwondo. We do the sports side of it. But over the years, we've done and hosted like seminars. We did one years ago, like 10 years ago, we hosted this all martial arts seminar over a 2-day weekend where we had people from, I think it was like 15 different styles come in over that 2-day weekend and do seminars. We had Aikido, we had Shaolin Kempo, we had kickboxing, we had judo, we had jiu-jitsu, we had hapkido. It's just boxing, anything you can think of, MMA, and all people could come and just come for that hour and a half and see what these other styles had to offer.
I mean, that is awesome, but just a different way people are built. Like there may be a certain technique or way I throw a kick that feels fine and comfortable and strong for me that may not necessarily be good for somebody with shorter or longer legs,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
individualizing the art more, making it for the person.
Yeah, exactly. It's always, I come to the conclusion, it's always the individual practitioner, because even the early days of UFC, they would try to pit different specific styles, boxing and jiu-jitsu. And then you have like the savate guy and you had the sumo guy, and okay, all these styles are cool and interesting. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if the guy's, obviously if the boxer gets taken down by a jiu-jitsu guy, he should have no chance,
Yeah.
But in general, if somebody's kind of well-versed in everything, a lot of it comes down to athleticism. Speaking of which, the fight that I have coming up, crazy fight on September 28th against Sugar Shane Mosley, that guy is just an athletic phenom.
Yeah.
Like in his prime against other elite boxers, he was just faster and more powerful. I mean, he just was. So obviously with that and his reflexes, his boxing, he's going to dominate regardless of necessarily what kind of style of boxing he does, just because he's so damn explosive and athletic.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So that Kempo school, how long did you stay there and what was next in your journey?
Well, that was several years. It was kind of interesting. I actually got very lucky because when I was doing it at the time, I was a poor college student, and, he was a lot of martial arts instructors. They might have good schools and be, good instructors and good people, but they're not really good businessmen. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he didn't really run the school as a great business. He actually slept in the school. There's really one guy funding the whole thing, whereas this really rich guy that he would train on the weekends. But lucky for me, he worked with me. He knew I barely had any money. So he's like, what could you afford to pay me? And I gave him $80 a month. Now, $80 a month back in the day would actually be a decent sum if you were just taking regular classes. Yeah. However, I had access to all my private training with him. Wow. A lot of times it was just me and him. Sometimes I would bring my brother and sometimes he would have another student, but I had so much access to him. But in exchange later, I would as a lot of students do, they end up teaching at least the beginner classes, right? Because the instructor, the main one, wants to take a break. So I thought that was a fair exchange. So anyway, I stayed with them for years. I was living in Sacramento at the time, but then I did transfer to film school in Northridge, but I would come back for the summer and continue training with them. But obviously when I'm in school, I wasn't out there. So that was several years. And then after that, let's see, I graduated college. See, the thing about martial arts, it's like fitness. It's like a lifestyle. So even when you're not doing formal training, I think you should still train. You could always improve your technique.
Yes.
So the lifetime martial arts, they're not always under formal training all the time. So I did go years after that, but just kind of doing my own thing. And that's how people develop as a martial arts or anything else. It would be later where, me and my brother would get into Tarzana boxing and fitness. That was the first time I was funny enough, they had jiu-jitsu classes there. So I did get some exposure to jiu-jitsu because they had weekly classes there. We're doing some boxing. And then, the real good formal training I would have after that would be quite a bit later, outside of like film fighting, which we did with Art Camacho, who was actually at the Martial Arts Dragons Fest yesterday. And
nice.
I haven't seen him for such a long time, but, he's been kind of seeing some of the stuff I've been doing lately. And I know he's been doing a lot bigger movies lately. He used to do a lot of Don Wilson movies, and he's moving on to bigger and bigger movies, which is great. And, perhaps we'll even work together on a film,
Be cool.
We talked about that briefly, but yeah, man, it was really the formal training after that, as far as like going to a studio and going there multiple times a week and getting heavily involved. It would be later with Krav Maga in the Midwest.
Okay. You mentioned going to school in Northridge. So as a movie fan at the time, did you know that, the Karate Kid tournament scene was filmed at Cal State Northridge, and did you go check out that gym?
No, I didn't know that. It would be later that I would even find out Frank Dukes went to Northridge, funny enough.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know that either. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, through my YouTube channel, I've gotten to know a lot of these individuals that I grew up watching. Like even yesterday at Dragon's Fest, I ran into Simon Rhee again.
Nice.
He didn't have a booth. He should have, but he just came out there, to say hi to a bunch of people real quick. It was cool to see him. And obviously Cynthia Rothrock was there. I worked with her on a film last year, The Last Kumite. I got my copy of The Last Kumite signed by her. I was like, Cynthia, you got to sign this for me.
Nice.
And funny enough, I was signing copies to other people,
And seriously, man, great movie. I loved it. I know I messaged you when I found my copy at Walmart, and I was very happy to get it actually on DVD. So
yeah, so awesome. I mean, that's some great distribution. I picked up all these copies at Walmart and then sold them signed copies when I was at the Dragons Fest yesterday. But so cool to just see the movie at Walmart.
Yeah, and I wasn't even looking for it. I was just walking through the electronics section, and I happened to turn my head and like, hey, I've been looking for this movie. So I'm like, all right, here's my $10. I'm gonna go home and watch it now. So yeah, I watched it that day.
That's cool.
Over your years of training, have you done any weapons training?
Well, a little bit. Well, okay, I'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
But over the last couple of years, the way I actually met Steven Seagal was through Grandmaster Gary Amon. I've been working with him for a while. He's got a hybridized Korean system with Tang Soo Do and Taekwondo and all this other stuff. So, I've been working with him as well.
Okay.
More recently. And then obviously right now, a lot of just pure boxing. And that's what Phil Polina, that's the gym that Don the Dragon Wilson trains at. And I met Phil through Don. So a lot of it's just pure boxing right now. But as far as weapons training, we were all introduced, of course, I believe most people, to nunchucks in Taekwondo. Yeah. So we were doing some nunchuck training in Taekwondo. And then, the Filipino fighting sticks in Kempo. But that's about the extent of the weapons. One big reason why I wanted to get into Krav Maga, because I was very interested in like the weapon disarms.
Okay.
With obviously knife defense, and you got, crowbars, you got gun defense and all that kind of stuff, which was quite a bit different and, in my opinion, a lot better than the stuff that I was exposed to in Taekwondo back in the day.
Yeah. You mentioned Krav Maga quite a few times. Where in the Midwest was that?
I was in Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah, the only Krav Maga Worldwide Center, official one, and that's under the founder from Israel, Emi, is Krav Worldwide. A guy named Jeff Fredrickson teaches that. He owns a school. He used to compete in MMA as well. So A lot of these guys, they got interesting backgrounds. I forget what his record was, but he was pretty good back in the day.
Okay. And you mentioned you went to film school. So what was the initial plan for that? I mean, did you want to be producer? What was the thought?
I was just interested in every aspect. Everything from acting to directing, always interested in screenwriting and then also editing. And I ended up double majoring in screenwriting and editing. I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
By the way, there's this script that I wrote called Blood Phoenix. And, I spent a lot of time on it. It's a passion project. Sheldon Lettich actually really likes it. And
wow.
The reason why that means something is, well, not only because of his background of having written or co-written Rambo 3 and then Bloodsport, then obviously wrote and directed Lionheart, Double Impact with Van Damme, then Mort Dacascos' huge movie, Only the Strong. Sheldon Lettich is a guy that will just tell you how it is, man. He doesn't really care if he hurts your feelings. Like, he could be abrasive. So if he says something's good, it's good, because if it's not, he'll just say it stinks, and he doesn't really care about your feelings. So getting that recognition from him where he said, hey, man, this is great. The structure is good. You hit everything on point. I love the dialogue. And he even wanted to direct it, which
wow,
that could be a possibility next year. So that was like, I remember getting the call because I'd sent him that script a little while ago, and he called me up one Saturday and said, hey, David, I read your script. I braced myself because I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to get honest feedback here. And that's what any writer needs, right? If someone reads your script. So that was great to hear. But the other funny thing is, I had big Hong Kong producer Bay Logan actually read it as well. And the first question he asked me was, did you really write that? I said, yeah, why? He said, well, it's really good. He didn't know I actually had a background in screenwriting, though,
That's kind of
But
cool.
that's a good, it's a backhanded compliment, but a great compliment nonetheless. If someone's like questioning if you really wrote it because they thought it was really good, it's like, that's a pretty good compliment.
Oh, definitely. You'll have to keep me posted, because if it gets made or when it gets made, I definitely want to check that one out too. That's cool.
Oh yeah, that's my dream project, man. That's the one that I know will like put me on the map and take me to the next level. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. And it actually has something unique that has never been done before. I don't really want to say right now, but when people see it, they'll be blown away, man. It'll go down of like, wow, that's a very interesting thing he did with that film. But yeah, and I've worked on quite a few films now. I know you mentioned some at the beginning. There's the Last Kumite that's available now. There's Bloodstorm, my first lead role that will probably be available in a few months. I know it's pretty much completed now, and there's a bunch of interest with different distributors that want to see the screener. There's another film, Elite Target. That's almost done too, where I played the villain. Then I recently shot Hard Redemption, also another villain role.
Nice.
The main villain in that, though, with the really, really badass fight against Gino Kang. That one co-stars Lou Ferrigno. That was shot in the Bay Area.
Oh, wow.
And then speaking of Sheldon, there's a film from producer-writer David Kirst that Sheldon's going to direct called A Mouthful of Knuckles in October. We're supposed to film that in Ohio, and that's going to be the return of Sheldon Lettich as the, action martial arts film director. The lead in that's a guy named Zach Shearer, great guy. That one, for me, the role I have, I actually like a lot, because even though the film's more like a Lionheart type film, you would just assume, the Viking Samurai, that martial arts guy, okay, he's probably just going to play one of the fighters in that, right? But it's like, no, I actually play a much different character. It's much more of an acting role and not a fighting role at all, which I'm excited about.
Very cool. That's something that I think a lot of action stars or, people who are known for one, even just if you're known for one specific thing, you want to branch out and show you can do more. So that's super important to be able to do that. And I'll be excited to see that one too. That's awesome. Congrats on that.
Oh, thanks, man.
So do you prefer to play the hero or the villain?
That's a good question. The way I see it playing out and what I plan to do and what I want to do. So the Bloodstorm, I'm like the anti-hero, but you could say the hero because I'm basically the lead. Me and this other girl I have to team up with are the two leads, where I'm an ex-assassin and she's just some naive, young, pretty police officer, So it's an interesting team up. But I think actors in general probably have more fun playing the villain because you could kind of go bigger and experiment more. And I mean, for me, like I'm just a nice, friendly, kind guy. So playing something that's completely out of my own character is fun.
Yeah.
Especially with this mouthful of knuckles. Me and Sheldon had talked about the character a few times on the phone already of how he he definitely wants people to not like this guy, So there's going to be interesting ways I could play it, just even with the look, with the way I want the character to look,
Okay.
But like as far as the career goes, I do want to play more of the hero roles because I do, want to get like the bigger roles in these films going forward. And these are just like smaller independent films right now, but trying to get into the bigger studio films down the line and get actually proper representation later because everything I'm doing by myself, which just getting in these films alone through my own networking,
Is
and then people
impressive.
like reaching out to me. Yeah, it's awesome. Or people recommending me. Like, for example, I was recommended by a mutual friend of mine and, the director, who I didn't know at the time, recommended me for that Hard Redemption. And then, obviously I did the audition and the Zoom call with him and then two of the other producers, and it went well. I got the call back and did it again, and they're like, "Yeah, we love you for this role," So,
Nice.
but just networking and meeting people who could either recommend you or whatever has worked out pretty well for me right now.
Okay.
But to get the bigger stuff, obviously, I'm going to need proper agency.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you won't even get a chance to audition for a lot of that bigger stuff.
Yep.
But as far as like the fight stuff, it's crazy because I had this first celebrity boxing match on March 9th. And, the way I specifically know the CEO of celebrity boxing now, Damon Feldman. His brother David runs the BKFC, which is huge because he had recently partnered with Conor McGregor. And it's funny because I had met up with him a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia, and right before, I met him in his office, he was literally on the phone with Conor McGregor. So it's crazy what he did with the BKFC. It's valued at like $400 million right now. It's from struggling just even 4 years ago. It's crazy. It's directly competing in a way with, even though it's a different sport, directly competing at least success-wise, with the UFC.
Yeah.
With the official celebrity boxing, so I had... Yeah, it's kind of crazy how everything's connected. It's all about networking because the way I got involved with official celebrity boxing and Damon Feldman was I had met a guy on Warrior Island, met a lot of great people on Warrior Island. In fact, a couple of them I even brought into the movie Bloodstorm because I was going to film that after. And I was like, got a couple of those guys that I met involved, including Saville Simak, a guy named Justin Herr, and then also a guy named Rick Stanford. And speaking of Rick, he had introduced me to a mutual friend, a great Taekwondo guy. Guy's also in the Boxing Hall of Fame named Jeff Gibson.
Okay.
He's out in Florida, got involved in some other business venture with him. But I was telling him about like these movies and, he knew my martial arts background. He's actually was really great kickboxer too, Jeff was. And he still trains at really great gyms, out in Florida. But anyway, long story short, he knew Damon Feldman. And because I'm doing these movies and got a background in martial arts, he introduced me to him saying, hey, you guys could probably do something together. So I basically kind of had to sell myself to Damon because when I initially got on a call with him, I could tell he gets calls and people wanting to fight on that platform a lot. And, he doesn't know anything about me. So I could tell just by the tone initially. He's like, oh, who's this guy? I'll just hear him out real quick because he's a friend of Jeff's, But, I impressed him enough and sold myself saying, hey, look, I'm going to be the martial art movie star that does a real fight. That's how we're going to promote it, And he's like, okay, well, what have you done? And, I showed him some clips for some movies. So it piqued his interest enough where he took a lunch with me. And then, crazy enough, he really liked my energy and my drive. And he said, look, we could probably get you somebody really big down the road, but let's do this smaller fight first. Let's make sure you actually look good in there, get a win under you, hopefully. And then we could go from there. So that went down in my favor. It worked out on March 9th, even though I had torn my bicep in late November. So I didn't even have full use of my left arm, but I figured, what? It's only a 3-round fight. If I'm aggressive, put the pressure on, I'm fine. I'll just use a right lead. And it worked out. I just pressured him the whole time, got the decision win. But anyway, it's just crazy what it led into. And there's so many things, so many stars aligned, by the way, with the Mosley fight. It just, Damon had introduced me to Jackie Kalin, the first lady of boxing, and they made a movie about her called Against the Rope, starring Meg Ryan. So Meg Ryan literally played her in a movie. She used to manage James Toney, but anyway, she's heavily involved in the boxing world. And I was talking to her and, kind of sharing the same story that I shared with Damon. And she's like, okay, you got some interesting stuff going on. And you win your fight on March 9th. Maybe we could get you a big name like Shane Mosley or someone. So anyway, that's how Shane Mosley's name got in my head. And I was just thinking, wow, that would be the most insane matchup ever. I would love that opportunity. A lot of people think I'm crazy because he's a knockout artist, man. He hurts a lot of people. He puts them down. And as far as like if it was a karate match, I'd be fine. But boxing, that's his world. You know, that's 100% his world. And he's a 7-time world champion because he's so good. Anyway, his name is in my head, and I can't get that name out of my head. You know, thinking of like, hey, let me get this crazy fight like that. It'll be like the real life Rocky if I get a fight like that. So fast forward 6 weeks. I'm actually training in California at Phil's gym, but I'm training with Don the Dragon Wilson. And he says, oh, hey, man, I gotta leave a little early today. I got an event to go to. I said, oh, well, where are you going? It's like, oh, it's some like beauty pageant thing, some European international. And I was supposed to go with Cynthia, but she didn't want to go. Cynthia Rothrock, that is. So I said, well, Don, can I go with you? He said, well, yeah, I don't see why not. Let me just, talk to the promoter real quick. So I put the promoter on the line and basically, I just said, hey, can I go with Don? You mind? He's like, yeah, sure. Just come with Don. So we're at that event. And this is 6 weeks after I had that conversation with Jackie, by the way, where Shane's name is in my head. So guess who's at that event?
Shane Mosley.
Shane Mosley. We see him on the red carpet and, I introduce myself, say, hey, Shane, I'm a big fan. Would love to take a picture, shake his hand. I leave it at that because he's busy. Everybody's trying to talk to him, right? But then this is where fate comes into play. Everybody's assigned a table at that event. And me and Don, and funny enough, Olivier Gruner, great guy. First time I met him, but I talked to him quite a bit at that event. Anyway, we're all assigned table 11. Like you're pre-assigned a table, because a lot of people, you get people like Don and Olivier Gruner, and then people want to spend time with them. So there's a lot of people that pay good money to sit at these tables with these people, like with Shane Mosley and all that stuff, right? So they could just kind of like, have conversations and hang out with them for the night. Anyway, I got lucky because I pretty much got Cynthia's ticket, So anyway, we're all at table 11, and there's an open seat right next to me. Guess who else is assigned to table 11?
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
It is Shane Mosley, man. And he's there with his dad, who's also like one of his trainers, So I strike up a great conversation with both of them. They're just very positive people. You could just feel that vibe, right? And I was explaining everything to Shane of what I got going on with these movies and this fight on March 9th and talking about, I mentioned Jackie Kalin and mentioned your name and all this other stuff and said, I'd love to have an exhibition match with you, And he was very receptive. He said, yeah, it sounds like it'd be a lot of fun, man. Wow. But he had like other potential ones he was going to do. And he's more than likely going to do some pretty big fights because I know he's looking at me more as like a tune-up as far as like, okay, let me probably knock some rust off with this guy. And then I'll get some, big UFC ex-champion or something afterwards, Anyway, he was receptive. So I got, I connected him with Damon. And, like things just don't happen like that fast, but at least the seed was planted. It's been been watered. And I ran into him at another event, at the BKFC event, the last one that Mike Perry fought at. Mike Perry, of course, recently fought Jake Paul in regular boxing. He lost pretty bad, but in bare knuckle, he rules. He's just so rugged and, bare knuckles obviously different the way these guys fight. So anyway, I was at that BKFC event and Mosley was there again. And funny enough, I was with Phil, my boxing coach, and I was just, keeping the conversation alive. Hey, Shane, look, this is the guy that's going to train me for an upcoming match, And he's like, oh, cool, man. So anyway, it's crazy how it all came about. But even just the way I met Damon through a guy, and then how I never expected to meet up and see Shane in person, let alone literally be assigned a seat next to him at an event.
Wow.
Like, okay, well, God literally put us right next to each other,
That is awesome.
Yeah. And then, of course, being linked up with Damon, it's like I got access to the platform that could put the event on. So I'm not just some random guy going up to Shane saying, hey, I want to do a fight with you. It's like, okay. It's like, oh, you kind of like need something. Like, do you know a guy who could put this on? Do you have this? Like, what are you doing? You're like, who are you? So luckily I'm just interested in him enough and have access to Damon to help put this thing on and facilitate it. So
nice.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, man. And now on September 28th, I get to be the real life Rocky. Like it's, I even told him during the press conference, if I win, it'll be the biggest upset in boxing history. He said, yeah, it will be, but you're not going to win. But I'm just saying, like, I know I'm very self-aware of this mountain to climb. And I always kind of refer to him as my Mount Everest. Nobody strolls up Mount Everest. Like Mount Everest is supposed to kick your butt, but it doesn't mean you can't conquer Mount Everest. And that's the way I look at it. Like I expect to get my butt kicked, but that doesn't mean I can't win this fight.
Yeah.
Now I'm not going to outbox him. I'm not going to be more technical, but as we all know, watching UFC fights, watching boxing fights, etc., it's not always the most technical guy that wins. It's not always the best, quote, boxer or MMA guy that wins. There's a lot of times that the other guy finds a way to win, you know?
Yeah. That is awesome. I'm excited to watch it. Perfect timing, because your episode here will come out about 2 weeks before that fight.
Oh, that's great. So anybody listening, if you're in the Philly area, if the tickets aren't sold out, please watch it in person. If they are sold out, get it on Triller. You can order that right now. And it's $29.99. And you could literally witness in real time, possibly, quite possibly, with my crazy self-belief, the biggest upset in boxing history happening.
Trust me, me and all the listeners will be pulling for you for sure. That would be cool to see that upset. So nice. So I gotta ask, what led to Viking Samurai? Kind of walk us through how that started.
Oh, I needed a creative outlet. About 5 years ago, I started my YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel was, I had mentioned before, you know, I've always had an interest in editing. And I was working as a stockbroker at the time. But, you know, and of course, I'm still doing my martial arts training. I'm lifting weights. You know, I got my fit. So, you know, that takes up a lot of time. But it's like, I need something more. I need a creative outlet. I'm just kind of bored in life. So I just started a channel that I talk about the 80s and 90s martial arts and action films, something that I've always been passionate about, always talked about, even in film school. And a lot of people in film school, by the way, they call these, quote, stupid action films. I never liked that term because I feel like there's actually a lot of creative genius in these films, you know? With like Rambo First Blood Part 2, Terminator. I mean, these are works of genius. They're art. They're not, quote, stupid action films that some people say they are.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was always my passion. So I just kind of figured, well, I need a cool name. Like, I don't want to just be like 80s action movie channel. It's like, no, that's too generic, right? So I needed to come up with a cool name. I figured, well, the Viking Samurais both kind of evoke warriors. And I looked it up and like nobody actually had Viking Samurai. I thought it sounded good. Plus my own background and ancestry. Like I do have some Northern European on the dad's side and I do have some Japanese on the mom's side, even though she's technically Korean.
Mm-hmm.
But you take a DNA test, you find out you're a lot more mixed than you probably realize,
Yeah.
you know, or at least thought or have been told through your family. So I figured, oh, this ties in perfectly. It's a cool name. It's original. And like, I do have Viking and samurai blood in me anyway through the ancestry stuff. So that's how the name came up.
Nice. And how did you go about getting your very first guest? And what type of challenges was that for you when starting out, when you're trying to actually get interviews with some of these people?
Well, that's the funny thing, because most people know of my channel as like, I interview so many great people, and I have over time. And it wasn't, I never intended to interview people, by the way. I intended to talk about these films, and that's what I did. Like I did breakdowns, for example. One popular video series I did before I had any guests was the top 5 martial art movie stars who weren't Van Damme or Seagal. You know, I talked about these guys who had like at least one theater film. You know, like Thomas Ian Griffith, he had Excessive Force that went to the theater. Mark Dacascos, he had Only the Strong that went to the theater. Jeff Speakman with Perfect Weapon. Philip Ree, you know, Brandon Lee, of course, but something tragically happened to him. He would have been a huge, huge movie star, in my opinion, had that accident not happened on The Crow. Anyway, I was doing videos like that, a lot of Van Damme, a lot of Seagal, a lot of Stallone, and I had covered a video about Steven Seagal and Gene LaBelle about that whole choking incident, and did a bunch of research and even found a little blip from something that was written by the late stuntman Stephen Lambert, because he was a guy who was literally there and witnessed it. So I even talked about that in the video, and the video was pretty popular. But see, the funny thing is his writing partner had reached out to me and said, hey, we seen your Seagal Gene LaBelle video, and Steven would love to talk about it because he was there in person. So I figured, well, that's great. I'll just sign up for Zoom for like a month. I'll interview him, get that whole story, and then I'll just cancel that membership, you know, because I didn't plan to continue interviewing anybody. But anyway, that was like 4 years ago, and I still have that Zoom subscription now because I never was the guy that like tried to get people to interview. For whatever reason, in some way, they've all just kind of come to me.
Wow.
Like, so I've been very lucky in that way, you know, like I'd say 90%, they've just, somebody was like, hey, you should interview this guy, could get you in contact. So it's like, they're doing, you know, my job for me. Oh yeah, cool. You know, what's his number or what's his email? And then, sometimes the actual guest itself would like, hey, I'd love to be on the show. It's like, sure, come on, you know, that's that's pretty much how it worked for me.
Very cool. Yeah, and seeing me, you know, I had a radio background, so the interviewing part was easy for me, but the guest, I actually pre-recorded 26 episodes before I released it.
Oh, wow.
My first ones. I was very lucky and had some, some bigger names say yes before they knew who I was. People like Ed Parker Jr. was one of my first guests, Tom Bleeker, Herb Perez, James DeMille. So Anne Maria DeMar. So I had, my first 10 episodes, I had some pretty big names in there. I got pretty lucky. And of course, like you said, then it's, 90% since then has been referrals from other people.
For sure.
And I've had a handful where they're like, yeah, can I be on your show? And most of them have turned out well. There's a couple that not so much because some people think they're better at interviews than they are. The people with like the 1-word answers. It's like, all right, I don't want to do a 7-minute interview. This is not going to be good.
Yeah, that's funny.
But for the most part, so you have a dream guest you haven't been able to interview yet that you're hoping to?
Yes and no. I mean, what I do plan to do in October is meet up with Steven Seagal, train with them, spend time with them, interview them. Mm-hmm. And that would be phenomenal. Cause I always talk about like the Mount Rushmore of action stars. It's Steven Seagal, it's Van Damme, but of course it's Arnold and Stallone. So an interview with any of those 4 would be phenomenal. Nice. Now, I have done a lot of videos on Seagal. I've done a lot of videos on Van Damme, and he's been a big influence on my martial arts, especially before I did my Kenpo training, as I had mentioned earlier, because my Kenpo instructor is very much into Seagal and kind of turned me on to him a lot more, even though I was already watching his movies, but just as a martial artist. You know what's funny? I also remember in college I was taking some computer class, and the instructor was like the biggest Steven Seagal fan, and I was like the biggest Van Damme fan. So a lot of the class was just us having debates about Van Damme and Seagal. And I'm sure the other people in the class were probably rolling their eyes because they didn't give a shit,
That's awesome.
I just remember stuff like that. It's pretty funny. But yeah, cool. A dream guest also, of course, would be like Van Damme. But here's the problem. I would just have to try to find a way to get something else out of him, because he's told his story so many times to so many people. And I don't just want to get something where he regurgitates the same thing, because it's like, well, you could have watched that 10 years ago,
Yeah, I get that.
So the only way it would really work, in my opinion, would be something similar to what I'm going to do with Steven Seagal, where I would meet up with him in person, spend time with them, eat with them, train with them, and get into some more interesting discussions. And then that would work. That would give the audience something unique.
Fingers crossed, man. I hope you can make it work with all 4 of your dream ones. That'd be awesome to see.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm curious, as a fan, as an MMA fan, are you more a fan of the original UFC with almost no rules, style versus style, or do you like what it's become today?
I like where it's evolved, because even today, you can kind of still pit style against style in a way, because like when you see someone like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson or Anthony Pettis, you really see, especially with Anthony Pettis, you really see that taekwondo on display in the karate with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, because nobody like kicks like him. Unless you really come up with that traditional background, traditional martial arts background, because in your regular run-of-the-mill MMA gym, you'll get some nice leg roundhouse kicks and drill those and some other stuff. You're not going to be spending time doing like these nice spin hook kicks and stuff that if you're at an elite level like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, you can actually land in a UFC fight,
True.
Which is always fun to watch. But so it's cool to see guys who are literally, I'd say, well-rounded, because once he learned his wrestling takedown defense, he was fine. It's like he knows his strong suit will never be jiu-jitsu, because that's not what he spent 20 years working on compared to his like stand-up striking with the karate.
Right.
So it's cool to see guys who are well-rounded enough, but then they excel like in one specific area. And that's what the UFC actually at least still has, Yeah,
agreed. In all your years of martial arts training, is there one philosophy that's at the top of your list?
One philosophy, it's just, white belt mentality, man. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter if you're like whatever degree black belt. Got to have that white belt mentality, because I think a lot of people, because of the ego part, they're more concerned and obsessed with their rank. It's like the rank shouldn't matter. I mean, if someone asks you, then okay, fine, tell them. But it shouldn't be the main thing that you're going out of your way telling everybody, I'm this, because what's more important is like, how good are you? Like, this is another philosophical question you can ask. Like, if someone got a black belt 20 years ago, but they quit training, are they still a black belt? It's like, are they? I mean, they've got the black belt at one point in time, but are they still a black belt if they haven't trained for 20 years? I don't think so.
Yeah, I've heard that argument from many people. I've heard both sides of it, and it's, I get it. I do. I mean, because like me, I got mine over 20 years ago, and I haven't trained consistently I mean, luckily my instructor, I have a key for the gym. So I go there on lunch breaks. I go there on weekends if I can't make class and stuff. So I'm not training as consistently as I used to, but I'm still training, just not like as much as I'd want to. But yeah, I mean, I've met others. I know people who got their black belts in the 90s and haven't trained since then. So yeah, I definitely get that argument.
I mean, I like to just define myself as a martial artist because I feel like being more broad like that, it doesn't limit me to anything because I'm always going to be open-minded.
Yep.
And I think, you gain wisdom over time. I think I have enough where I can at least filter out the nonsense. Obviously when you're younger in your career as a martial artist and less experienced, you can't really filter out a lot of the nonsense,
Right.
And so that's the drawback to being open-minded where, I like the saying practice makes permanent instead of practice makes perfect, because if you're practicing stuff that's not effective, well, do you really want to be great at stuff that's not effective?
True. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. How about your worst martial arts related injury?
Ooh, worst injury. Man, I mean, I've definitely had some bad ones. Lifting weights. Well, I'd say tearing my bicep. Crazy enough,
Yeah.
It actually happened sparring and boxing.
Oh, wow.
So that would qualify, and that was bad because it set me back. I mean, I literally had to have surgery. I had to be in a cast for 6 weeks. So I'd say that's the worst.
Yeah, I would. As soon as you said that, like, oh yeah, because I tore a tricep, so I definitely know what that's like. The difference is I never had mine repaired. I've literally just dealt with the pain for 12 years, and I still train, still hit the bag, still.
I mean, so mine rolled up like a window blind. Does the tricep? I'm sure the muscle looks shorter then because it's not attached.
It's just it's just there's like a bulge on my right arm where you can tell it like it just popped. And
wow.
It's like for that first 3 days, it was massive pain. But I'm like, then they talked about the surgeon. Like, this is how long you'll be out of commission. You won't be able to drive because you won't have your right arm. And I'm like, and what if I just don't do it? The doctor's like, what? I go, what if I just don't have it? He's like, well, you'll probably be in some pain. I'm like, I have a high tolerance for pain. That doesn't bother me. So I've never had, same with my knee. I blew up my knee when I was 16. I've never had my knee rebuilt. So I'm stubborn.
Well, that's interesting about the tricep because most guys will tear the biceps. That's very common, A lot of people moving furniture when the weight shifts. That's the most common way to tear it. Obviously, people that work out too. But yeah, man, like I didn't have to get the surgery, but talking to the doctor because it made more sense for me to do it because I'm athletic. He said, look, you'll never get full strength in that arm back. Like you could use it, but you'll never have full strength. And then also it won't, look as good because it'll look like you half your biceps gone. It's like, well, I mean, I kind of like how my biceps look. So, just aesthetically, I would like that back, to look normal again.
I get that. I'm just stubborn. I don't like doctors. So
yeah, well, I had a pec delt tie-in pull back in high school lifting weights. I remember bench pressing specifically, and I never, like I was living with my dad at the time, and he's in the Army. I mean, he's never going to be the one to take himself or his kid to the doctor, you know?
Yep.
I mean, and I was never a doctor guy, so never go to the hospital, like unless I'm shot or something. It's like, okay, maybe I'll go. But in general, like, yeah, I would never go. So that took about 9 months, but that was horrible. And I would just work out around it. Funny enough, even with that bicep tear and being in like that kind of cast, that adjustable thing that they put you in for like 6 weeks and then saying I can't use it. I was just lifting with my right side and lifting my legs and still doing my kicks and boxing with one hand, and I was still, driving with one hand, which actually was very hard with a manual transmission, by the way, when you got one arm.
Dang, yeah.
But hey, man, I was able to work around it as best I can.
That's impressive.
It's like, hey, yeah, you got to do what you got to do, man.
Nice. All right, this one, you kind of talked about your Mount Rushmore of action movie stars. I always ask people who were 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Oh, well, of course, you got to put Bruce Lee up there for obvious reasons, just his philosophy to the arts, but just being that physical specimen. I mean, he was amazing, how fast he was, how explosive, everything about him, but, the philosophy and developing Jeet Kune Do. Then, of course, being with like the Taekwondo background and everything, Philip and Simon Rhee, phenomenal, and they did a movie with so much heart that kind of captured the essence of martial arts, not just about fighting, it's a lot more than that. And then, because who had a big inspiration on me growing up. It was the biggest stars, Steven Skull and Van Damme. Like, they were just the biggest stars. They had the bigger, better movies because they had the production values. I mean, you look at Seagal's first movie, he did that with Andrew Davis. That's an amazing director. That guy went on to do like The Fugitive, you know? So, of course, you're going to get, and Seagal even said, Above the Law, it's not a martial arts film. You know, it's much more than that. And it was. It just incorporated some martial arts. And I love how they introduced him. It was almost like semi-autobiographical in a way, right? Where they he talked about it. In watching the movie at the time, I'm like, oh, I thought that was really him in real life. I thought he was just this Italian guy and all this other stuff, you know? But yeah, you know, it's Bruce Lee, it's Philip and Simon Rhee, it's Van Damme and Seagal. Because I think of all those guys, especially Bruce Lee, Van Damme, and Seagal specifically, and that's because they had the bigger careers of the movies.
Yeah.
I would say influenced so many people. And, you know, you could say the same thing about Stallone as far as people who go to the gym and lift weights.
True.
Rocky and Rambo, I'm sure by far had inspired way more people than, well, outside of Arnold, but Arnold did movies too. But, you know, outside of Arnold, than any bodybuilder. Like, Stallone got more people in the gym than like any professional bodybuilder outside of Arnold, of course. But that's because Arnold did movies.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. That's a great Mount Rushmore. All right, maybe you already have this picked out, but whether it's for boxing, for MMA, what would your MMA or what would your boxing walk-up music be? What song's playing as you're walking into the cage or the ring?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. There's so many good ones. But right now with this fight with Shane Mosley, there's a song that's really resonated with me. It's called My Time Coming. And this girl named Lady Ace, the Goddess Ace, made this song a couple of years ago, and I've just been listening to it when I've been training. So I hit her up on Instagram. I said, hey, you know, I love this song. Resonates with me. I got this fight coming up with Mosley. I think it'd be amazing if you walked me out with that. And she said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So
that's cool.
You know, with the celebrity boxing, they want a live artist walking each fighter out.
Really?
So that's a song that just at this point in my life, really liking the lyrics and feeling it. You know, it's not like the most energetic, hard rocking, you know, it's like not like a DMX rap song or some metal that, you know, so it may not be like a song that the average fighter would walk out to, the typical fighter. But, you know, everything about this event, I mean, there's nothing average or typical about it. I mean, this is literally the real life Rocky story. I mean, I know that Shane is just so many levels in boxing above me as he is with everybody else. I mean, he beat Oscar De La Hoya twice, you know, so I'm not going to delude myself thinking I'm on his level in the boxing realm. But, you know, with all of my, I believe I am aligned with the right people. I know I got the right coach and Phil. I know I got the heart. I know I got the discipline. I think I could, you know, realistically pull off the crazy upset, even though the odds are severely not in my favor.
That's cool, though. That's awesome. All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Oh, a favorite martial arts book. I'm trying to think of the name of the book. One of my friends actually gave it to me in college, funny enough. I think it was Master He-Il Cho.
Oh, okay.
It was one of his like jump kicking book. Well, not just jump kicks. He incorporated all kinds of kicks, but it had a lot of his more dynamic jump kicks in there. And that was definitely helpful for me. It was really helpful for him too, because he used to do the tricking back in the day, which, you know, wasn't as popular 20 years ago, but that book helped him a lot too. And then I was like, oh, you know, I could utilize this. These are some good tips that I got from him, that he got from that book, you know?
Okay, nice. He-Il Cho's one that I'd love to meet someday and talk to and whatnot. But
yeah, you got to interview him, man, before it's too late. I mean,
I've tried. I've reached out through his website, and so far I've got no response. So I'm hoping. I mean, like I said, I was lucky enough to get Fumio Demura before he passed away, which was phenomenal to chat with him. But I've sent probably 4 requests to He-Il Cho's website and never got a response. So I'm hoping. I'm going to keep trying.
Yeah, definitely, man. And if you could just meet somebody that knows him, that's obviously very helpful. But it is important to get these conversations and these interviews while we can.
Yeah.
Like, since I started my channel, for example, Stephen Lambert, my first ever guest, had passed away. Another guy that I interviewed, funny enough, also related to the Gene LaBelle Steven Skull story, the actual stunt coordinator who was there and got Gene LaBelle involved working on the film, Conrad Palmisano, and I got the whole story from him on my channel as well. But he had also passed away earlier this year, I believe. So a lot of these guests, man, they're no longer here, but at least they kind of leave their stories behind, you know. on these different podcasts like mine and yours.
Yeah, I had James DeMille was episode number 6, and I was his last interview before he passed away a few months later. And so I think I've had 3 of my guests now passed away too. So it's...
Oh, I almost got Bob Wall. Bob Wall, of course, passed away too. Yep. But literally, I had talked to him on the phone about a month before he passed. He sounded great. He said he would do the show, and we were going to plan something, and then he's gone.
I had been chatting with Jason David Frank, same type thing. We were trying to set something up. So that one hurt too when that happened. But
someone actually had reached out to me about him because I had done a video. Like, I never met the guy. I don't know the guy. I mean, I know somebody who knew him. But anyway, I just kind of did a little video, like a little talk about, how tragic that is and how precious life is and all this other stuff. Anyway, and I forgot who she was. Some lady from some production company reached out because he wanted to utilize that in some capacity and have me sign a release and all this other stuff. But I'm like, yeah, I'm happy. If I get more exposure and you like what I said about the guy, then great, use it.
That's cool. All right. How about a favorite martial arts video game?
Oh, man. The one that, I loved all those fighting games back in the day. I mean, I played them all. The ones on the Neo Geo, Fatal Fury, Samurai Showdown. Obviously, Street Fighter 2 was the big one when it came out. The Mortal Kombat games, which they're still making Street Fighter as well. I would say my favorite, only because I have the fondest memories, and there's a certain point in my life, and it was the height of the fighting games. Street Fighter 2, when that came out, is just, how could you not absolutely just fall in love with that?
Definitely. Yeah. See, I was always more Tekken. I don't know why, but
you were a Tekken guy. Well, see, I love the 3D games. Like Virtua Fighter came out because that seems a little more realistic, right? Than like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, obviously. But yeah, Tekken, they're still making those too.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I worked in a retail store. I worked in a Walmart when that came out, and we had, of course, a demo thing set up. And we'd always, like, if we were going on break and we wanted to play, and there was kids playing, we'd be like, just so you know, your time's up. And then, of course, they'd walk away and we'd start playing.
That's funny. Dude, I remember they had, so you have all these stores now that are GameStop, but I think they have ties back in the day to like Software, etc., and EB Games and all that,
Yep.
Babbage's, which did a lot of computer software. Anyway, there was a Software, etc. at the mall. This was before I had a Super Nintendo. Me and my friends, we didn't have it at the time. We didn't have the game or anything, but they had it, like when we went to the mall, they had the little kiosk where you could play Street Fighter 2, and we literally were there for like hours. And the guy who ran the store every once in a while was like, okay, it's, you guys been here for a little too long. He would like turn it off, I'm sure maybe he was doing what you were doing, trying to get us out there so he could play.
Oh, probably. Oh, we used to have parents that would come to Walmart shopping, and they'd literally just drop their kids in electronics so they could play video games while their parents were shopping for 2 hours. We're like, yeah, we're not babysitters. Like, come on. All right, these last few questions might be, for someone like you, they could be tough to answer. We'll see. As much as pop culture, and how about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Favorite martial arts TV show. I don't consume a whole lot of content right now, and I know if I watch, I'm sad to say, but I haven't finished. I'm several seasons behind in Cobra Kai.
Okay.
What I have seen, I absolutely loved, and I do eventually plan to finish it. I'm also sure I would love Warrior, based on Bruce Lee's writings. I'm sure I would love that. Now, the show that I watched back in the day that I hope they actually released officially, I don't think they did, was a show called Vanishing Sun with Russell Wong.
Loved that show. So good.
Yeah, I mean, I ate that up, but literally I haven't seen it since the 90s. But that one comes to mind of something I'd want to revisit, and I know I enjoyed it very much. So I'll definitely put that on the list.
Nice. You're one of, I think, only 2 that have mentioned that show, and I love that show so
much.
That's
a shame. Yeah, I hope it gets a proper, like, updated Blu-ray high-definition release or something, or put it on Netflix maybe.
The one I'm hoping to get released officially is Sidekicks, since it was owned by Disney. I'm hoping Disney Plus will put Sidekicks on at some point with Ernie Reyes Jr., because I loved that show as a kid. That was your Ernie Reyes Jr.
I only know the Chuck Norris movie Sidekicks. I didn't know about the show.
Yeah, so it's Ernie Reyes Jr. and Gil Gerard. Gil Gerard was Buck Rogers back in the 70s, and he played a cop. And Ernie Reyes Jr. was like this 8 or 9-year-old kid whose like grandfather died. And basically, the grandfather was friends with this cop and asked him if he'd watch his son. And so essentially, Ernie Jr. was this little 8, 9-year-old martial artist who would go and solve crimes with this cop. If you remember the early 90s show Street Justice, it was essentially a version of Street Justice was the adult version of Sidekicks, in my opinion. But,
okay.
Yeah. I think it was one of, Red Sonja was Ernie Reyes Jr.'s first like on-screen thing. but then Sidekicks was his first like starring TV show. So good.
Okay.
There's some bad quality videos on YouTube, but just to get an idea, I mean, like I said, it was like 80, 83, 84, 85. So it was during the boom when the Karate Kid was coming out and everything like that, and everyone was trying to capitalize on martial arts. So, but
sure.
as a 9-10-year-old kid, I loved it.
Yeah,
Nice.
No doubt.
How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Oh, there's so many good ones. I mean, the first one that comes to mind, of course, for me would be Bloodsport. It inspired and motivated me so much. And looking back, I do honestly believe I say the greatest martial arts movie of all time. I know people will make the argument with Enter the Dragon, and that's a valid argument.
Mm-hmm.
Bloodsport just had everything going for it. You had a new charismatic star who obviously would go on to do huge things with Jean-Claude Van Damme. He had such an amazing story, well executed, good idea from Frank Dukes, and obviously Sheldon Lettich, his friend at the time, helped him write that. But just the score, Paul Herzog, the songs from Stan Bush, the editing, that kind of like the editing was brilliant, because the stories it wasn't that good, and then they recut it, and then everybody loved it, and Van Damme had a hand in that, and he had a hand in editing a lot of his early films and the ADR and those iconic Van Damme noises, which I know were inspired by Bruce Lee, by the way. There's really only two guys that really pulled that off in such a cool way, in my opinion, was Bruce Lee and Van Damme. But Bloodsport's just a film that had literally everything going for it, and it had that mystery of like, hey, is this real? Like, what was this? Did something like this really happen?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of those ones where I have that handful of martial arts movies that I watch once a year. Bloodsport, Best of the Best, Perfect Weapon, Only the Strong, Karate Kid. Those 5 I watch at least once a year. Every year.
Yeah,
clockwork.
Ridiculous amount of rewatch value.
Yeah, definitely. All right, final question. This one doesn't necessarily have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen, favorite movie fight scene?
Yeah, one of the standouts, of course, was Best of the Best with Philip and Simon Rhee.
Yes.
That was incredible display of just, some of the best kicking out there. But I would say my all-time favorite, and a lot of fight choreographers or stunt guys would probably give me crap about this, but I would say Bloodsport with Van Damme and Bolo. Like, I know it's not the most intricate, fight scene put together. Just the build-up, though, man. It's so every aspect of it, just the cutaways, just how the crowd gets involved, just how Van Damme gets blinded by the white powder, and then you have those flashbacks, and then he comes back fighting blind, and just everything about it, man. That's just so cinematic and memorable. So even though it's not the most technical or intricate fight put together, I think the way it's all put together in film, it's so cinematic and forever embedded in my memory, and I know so many other people. So I'm going to say that one because that's the one that I remember so much.
Awesome.
And love watching. Like, you put it out now, I would much rather watch that than, like the fast-paced stuff and, God forbid, the wire work that they use in a lot of films, too. Like, I'm not into that kind of stuff, I would just much rather... You really feel these characters, especially as you've been with Van Damme, training as a kid in Bloodsport, and then getting this competition. It's so important to honor his Shidoshi that he even goes AWOL with the military, and then just what that fight means for him. It has nothing to do with money or anything else. It's just honoring his sensei. Beautiful.
That is cool. I love it. Well, David, before I let you go, is there anything that I forgot to ask you, or you just want to be sure we get out there? And I will put links for your website, your YouTube channel, your IMDb page, and anything else you need me to. But any last minute things you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
Okay, yeah. Guys, just follow me on YouTube, Viking Samurai. I got a lot of great interviews with martial artists and actors, directors, stuntmen, etc. Check out my own journey on Instagram, Real Viking Samurai. Of course, check out the movies like The Last Kumite, the upcoming Bloodstorm, and then make sure to watch the fight on September 28th against Sugar Shane Mosley. It'll be the real-life Rocky story.
Nice. Well, David, seriously, man, I appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, and you got a fight coming up, so you got a fight camp and stuff, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to do this, and it's been a blast getting to know you a little better and hearing more about your story, and I can't wait to get the episode out.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.